Welcome back, everyone, to Vintage Egyptologist here on YouTube. Today, we're going to delve into a little bit more detail into the orientation of hieroglyphs. So if you haven't seen part one, take a moment and watch that introduction. And by the end of our short lesson today, you will know where to start reading the hieroglyphic text, as well as how it works when signs are stacked. For those of you who are well versed already in hieroglyphic signs, I ask that you stay tuned to the end of today's episode, where John will be joining me to discuss perturbation in New Kingdom royal tombs and the Netherworld Books. So let's get started with the first portion of our lesson. We know that when we look at a hieroglyphic text, we always read towards the faces of the signs. And that's easy because most hieroglyphic texts are going to have an owl or a quail chick or a representation of a person or a body part, so you always know the direction to start reading. This magnificent folio plate for the temple of Seti I at Abydos is a perfect example of how the Egyptians used the orientation of hieroglyphs to create a unity of art and writing. So here we can see King Seti I making an offering, actually burning incense, before the god Osiris and his wife Isis. In this scene, each of the figures has hieroglyphs oriented in the same way as what is being labeled. So we're going to work actually from the far left here. We can see the goddess Isis wearing the horns and sun disk that she actually adopts from the iconography of Hathor. And she is labeled Isis, the Great, Mother of the God, the Mistress of Heaven. Those hieroglyphs read right to left, the same direction in which Isis is facing. Now, when you have a situation in a vertical column where you have hieroglyphs in a square, you maintain the right to left reading, but then read top to bottom within these smaller squares. So Set, the first biliteral in the name of Isis. T is a phonetic complement, meaning that it repeats the second of the biliteral sounds. And then an egg, which is a determinative that can be used in the New Kingdom for the name of a goddess. So that is Isis. Another biliteral where, which is the bird, WR, followed by it, phonetic complement. And then if we keep going, again, we see the stacking of signs for the word pet. So the P and the T reading across, and then the pet sign itself, which is used both as an ideogram and a determinative. If we move to the next figure, our green-faced Osiris here, we again see that the hieroglyphs are facing the same way as Osiris. We have the I and the Set sign that writes Wesir, the ancient name for Osiris. We typically use the Hellenized, the Greek version. And the seated god is the determinative. So Osiris, then a triliteral, Genti, which means foremost, and he is foremost of the Yementiu, the Westerners. Now, Yementiu is plural, which is why we have 3 strokes. And when we get into the grammar of nouns, we will talk about singular, dual, and plural. Osiris has 2 additional epithets. Wen Nefer, spelled with the desert hair and the Nefer sign, and Neb Ta Jesser, Lord of the Sacred Land, with then the 3-hilled Chesed sign, the desert sign, as the determinative. So the 2 gods facing to the right have their hieroglyphs facing the same direction as they are. When we turn next to King Seti I, we see the hieroglyphs change orientation so that now the label to Seti is facing the same way as the king. We see Seti in this cap crown with uraeus, and the hieroglyphs that label him face left to right, just as he does. And this says a spell foreseeing the god. This is part of the daily ritual. And then Jed Medu In, words spoken by. And this is another great example of you read the Je serpent first, then the Medu stick, then the reed leaf. So every time you come to stacked signs, you keep reading in the overall direction and then left to right across or top to down, depending on how they're stacked. These are words spoken by the king, and the king is Neb-Tawi, Lord of the Two Lands, Men Ma'at Ra, that is the name of Seti the First. And you will notice that this cartouche, I read bottom to top. This is another principle of hieroglyphic writing called honorific transposition. If you have a word or a name that includes the name of a god, or sometimes also in reference to the king, you write the god's name first, even though you read it last. So you read Min first, enduring, Ma'at, cosmic order, of Re. So that is an example where the orientation, the order of the signs, is different than what you would expect because of honorific transposition.
So let's look at this introductory section on one of the sides of the Second Shrine of Tutankhamun from the Tomb of Tutankhamun. This is based on a segment of the otherwise better known Book of Gates. So here we see two goddesses to either side of a ram-headed pole. The ram head indicates youth or flesh, the night form of the sun god. And this goddess is adoring, as is this goddess, this head of Re. And in fact, it's labeled here in more or less normal orthography, Tep Ra, head of Ra. Now, these are the names of the two goddesses. Now notice this. This isn't a common sign. This is a very uncommon sign. It's a person with their arms out, surrounded by a series of dots.
They're swimming.
This is the elaborate determinative, we might even say ideogram, of to swim, which is nebi in Egyptian, the verb nebi. So, it is followed by a ch hobble. So I've got nebich, nebich. Then I've got a second H, so a ha, plosive H, normal hieroglyph, followed by these three-pronged plant signs. They can appear as determinatives. They can have the phonetic value hen. But remember, we mentioned substitution. I can say, well, you know what? I have a plant sign here, so I'm going to substitute a plant sign. Each of these substitutes for the standard reed leaf. The value yod or I. You can transcribe it almost as an I even. So, hitch, nebich, hitch. This is nebethit, an attested orthography of the name Nebethut that we know from the Hellenized form, much better, as Nephthys. So this is a cryptographic orthography of the name of the goddess Nephthys. And if we see Nephthys and we see another goddess, we can be fairly certain that this is in fact the goddess Isis. And it is. Two Sheh signs, Shesh. But the first rectangular sign, which is a land or water sign, can substitute for another. This can substitute for the island sign that has rounded edges, that has the phonetic value iu. And of course, the wow being a weak consonant, we can disregard if we want to in cryptography. And she, remember our substitution? I can substitute one bird sign for another. If I want to, I can play around with signs based on their phonetic classification. Sh is a sibilant, so it can substitute for another S. So here we've got, rather than shesh, we've got yuish for is, for us, isa for Isis. So we have Isis and Nephthys, the head of Re, and cryptographically here, Nen, the red crown net for N actually appears in normal hieroglyphic text a lot in the Ramesses period. Then M, that's a sawbird substituting for the M, owl. M, Sacher, the elaborate, we might say, piece of cloth with a belt, substituting just for that bolt of cloth. That's the normal S. So another substitution of kind. Then M, Sacher, pen, the spewing mouth for poo, for pui, P. It's a bilabial. It literally is demonstrating the plosive action of the mouth. Nen em sekur pen. These are like this. Nen em sekur pen, or when en nen em sekur pen, or when en nen en netur en sekur pen. These are like this. These exist in this manner. These gods are like this. This is a common introductory annotation in the Netherworld books. Nen em sekur pen, probably shep tep, receiving the head, or those who receive the head. And then it says, if we look at these signs, they're single hieroglyphs, so they're probably substituting for single phonetic values. We've got an N, nu for N. We have our sawbird, that could be standing for any single uniliteral bird sign. Here's probably an M. Here we've got our three-pronged plant, substituting for some plant sign. There's our elaborate, say, cloth with a belt. So let's assume that might be S again. And then there's a snake. Now, a snake can substitute for another snake. So here's an elaborate serpent that usually appears as a determinative. What if it's substituting for the horned viper?
That would mean an F.
That would be an F. Now, if I read this, Nesef, something, right? Well, already it's not working. What does that mean? Well, what if it's retrograde then? So, Fesan.
That doesn't work either.
It doesn't work for a while. So, I worked with this for a while, and then I realized, well, an annotation that often appears with deities, that will appear with the king, etc., is a protective formula that describes life, protection, etc., being all around someone. And Egyptian has this interesting preposition ha, second H aleph, that literally means around, behind. So it gets across this notion of being around, not just behind as we often translate.
It's like the wings of the Horus falcon in that great statue of Khafra in the Cairo Museum.
Right,
He's ha. Yeah.
They're around behind. So what I realized is this is a really interesting use of perturbation, so that when I read this text, I am doing what the goddesses are doing. It is sen, em, ha, this three-pronged plant substituting for the ha sign three-pronged plant, which is something that we find actually happening sometimes in normal hieroglyphic texts based on mistranscriptions out of the hieratic. Remember, some of these signs look a lot more similar in the cursive than they look in the hieroglyphs. So some of the substitutions in the cryptography are playing with the possibilities out of hieratic and then transposing those into hieroglyphs. Sen im ha f. I read this circularly. They are all around him, meaning in this protective gesture. So the direction of reading of hieroglyphs also has a magical aspect to it. Reading in retrograde, reading in a circular fashion, etc. This is more for an ancient Egyptian than just this is not a tongue twister. This is more than an eye twister. This is more than just messing with something. This can literally cause you to make the motion of backing up, of going back around something. And the retrograde motion can relate to the concept of enchantment for the Egyptians, which is sheni, pesher, etc., to go around, to encircle. So retrograde writing and perturbations, mixing up of signs for the ancient Egyptians, can impart an even deeper or additional meaning to a text.
So we hope you enjoyed the episode today, from simple orientation to some of the most complex perturbation and cryptography that there really is in any ancient Egyptian text. If you want to follow our vintage and Egyptological adventures, don't forget to give us a follow on Vintage Egyptologists on Instagram. If you haven't subscribed yet here on YouTube, please do so. Give us a few comments, suggestions for future episodes, and we'll make sure to include in the notes references to all the books we're using, as well as where you can find more information about how to read hieroglyphs.